Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be going over the main components of Renoise. This isn't going to be an in-depth thing. It's to understand what each piece of Renoise does so that you can now use it to make music. If you're more experienced, a lot of this stuff you'll probably know, but it's helpful to know where things are, and I'll try to drop information in a condensed, useful manner so that you can pick up like little tips and tricks that I wish people would have dropped for me. So here we open it up, and you probably have different windows already open. You might have this compressed and that over there compressed, and maybe you have a spectrogram or whatever. Like you might just have a different view. Don't worry, we'll cover that right now. So the first main component of Renoise is the pattern editor. So this is the pattern editor. It's the biggest part. And to get to it, you come up here and you see it says edit. So you click that. And so we click it like, oh, okay, we're in the edit window. And we see here that it's composed of tracks. So we have 8 tracks, a master track, and a send track. And we also have our lines here on the side. And they start from 0 and go to 63. So we have 64 lines in total. That means that when we play back, when we hit, okay, so we've got tracks and we've got lines. And we've got some additional types of tracks. We're not going to worry about those right now. So your question may be, all right, now how do I understand what happens when I push play? So you hit space bar, it starts to play it, and you go, okay, what's happening here? How is this working out? Well, it's playing according to your tempo. So our tempo right now is 85 beats per minute. I'm not going to explain that. If you don't know what that is, go check out my MIDI music theory series. It will take you through beats per minute and stuff. But you might be going, all right, but what do these lines represent? Like how fast is it reading my lines? Well, if we come up here, they have this LPB that stands for lines per beat. So right now it's set to 4. So that means that every line, every beat is going to read 4 lines. So this essentially means that these lines represent 16th notes. And every time I hit play, it's going to read them back at that rate. So the big takeaway here is this will set the resolution of your grid. There are ways to change the resolution in real time during playback and all that other mumbo jumbo. We're not going to worry about that right now. But if you want to, like, for example, the highest resolution right here is, all right, so we have 4 lines. So this is beat 1, and then this is the and. This is 1 E and 2 E and that's how you count out subdivided beats if you don't know music theory. Anyway, this is beat 1, this is beat 2, this is beat 3, this is beat 4, this is beat 1 of the next measure. So if we want to increase our resolution, because right now we can only write in 16th notes, that's the most we can do. If we want to write in 32nd notes, we have to double our resolution, and now we can now write in 32nd notes. So I'll often work in 8 pretty often, and it's not terribly difficult to change the resolution for a moment, but it is like a huge hassle. I think it's in many ways more convenient just to pick one resolution and stick with it, unless you're going to do a big shift. But if you're just going to be doing a grace note or something, it might be easier just to add a note column and then use a delay rather than change the resolution of your grid. So we'll look at stuff like that later. I'm not sure if I'll bring up that particular example, but you'll get the idea behind using delay effectively, because this is like, at first this seems kind of limiting, but there are so many workarounds and so it's not a big deal. Like, don't even sweat it. It's not a big deal. So, okay, now you might be saying, okay, in my pattern, how do I change the number of lines? Well, I very rarely do this currently, but if you want to, you can come up here and you can type in a new value. Let's say we want 128 lines per pattern, and then bang, there you have 128. And it actually goes to 127, but there's 128 in total. So that's what that shows up there. When you create a new pattern, though, it'll go back to 64. If you want it to be permanent, you have to go into song options and yada, yada, yada. But anyways, that's this. And now you put down your instructions here, and it will tell each track will tell sounds how to behave. So something that's pretty unique to Renoise is that a track is not linked to one sound. A track does not care. It's like the purest MIDI track you can have. You get to have this track send out commands to like 8 instruments, and they could all be playing on one track, and you could just add note columns. And so you see I just added a couple note columns, and I did that by hitting Control Shift over, and if I go the other way, they'll take them away. Or you could hit this plus. So these are columns where you enter notes, and these are columns where you enter effects. So if you want to write a chord, you'll need a couple note columns, and you get really used to it. Like it's not a hassle at all. But this means that you could get away with one track and just have all your samples being called on one track with a lot of note columns. So there's some interesting things here. Like that's not typically how you think about things in other DAWs. It's just not the way it's thought about. But pretty cool. We also have a send and a master. I can't remember if I said that, but we'll deal with other types of tracks later, but you get the idea. We put instructions here, and this just tells sounds how to behave. So jumping over to our next one, let's say that we've created a cool pattern. So here's our pattern. We've constructed it. It's 128 beats, not beats, measures, lines. 128 lines long. And by the way, to navigate this, because it becomes so stupidly difficult to go up and down, if you hit home on your keyboard, it'll scroll you immediately to the top or bottom. And then you can use the F9 through F12 keys to scroll through portions of your pattern. So if you hit like F9, it will take you to the top. F10 is 1/4. F11 is half. And then F12 is 3/4 of the way through your pattern. So it works on a ratio. So regardless of pattern size, it's a good way. I also like to work in the page up, page down. This will scroll you up and down by 16 lines. So very, very handy way of doing things. There's a whole bunch more shortcuts, but I think it'll be a little overwhelming to drop them all on you right now. So anyways, that's this window. Now let's move over to the pattern sequencer. So we've edited our pattern. We've got it sounding the way we want. Now we want our pattern sequencer to begin to play back our patterns so that we can begin to form the structure of a song. Now this can get pretty detailed, but I'm just going to make it simple for now. So we see here that we have our patterns labeled. So I have 2 patterns. And if I want to add more patterns, I simply push the plus bar. And the minus bar to get rid of them. And now I don't ever work in this window. I don't think it's nearly as intuitive as if you push this little button up here. Not really sure what it stands for, but if you hit it, it'll open up the pattern sequencer and you can see each individual track. So you could, for example, let's say if you double click on a track, you can rename it. So I name it kick. You notice that You notice that it's named kick here and it's named kick here. And so this time now I could like put in a kick command, and the way I'm going to do is I hit escape and it will put me in edit mode. So escape puts you in edit mode, and then I can use my computer keyboard to type commands. So here I put some commands down. You see they're appearing. They're part of pattern 4. And what I can do is I can control C and then control V, and now my kick commands will appear in pattern 0 as well. So I can begin to take pieces out, and I can also change them here. They don't change the original. So the original still is the same, but so this is basically this is a really great way to form a song. A thing about navigation, if you scroll over here, it'll scroll you up and down, but if you scroll over here, it'll scroll you by patterns. So you see we're going through our various patterns, and it's reflected in our pattern editing window. And so this is a very convenient way to navigate. If you're in your pattern, I'm not going to talk about keyboard focus right now, but some keyboard shortcuts only work when your keyboard focus is on a specific area of Renoise. And there's a way to shift it around. You just alt-click on the section. It will move your keyboard focus. You see it shifts by these orange lines. But if you're focused on the editor, it's very inconvenient to grab your mouse and go way over here and do this thing. So what I like to do is I hit Control up down. You see it moves me through my patterns as well, and I don't have to reach over and grab the mouse and move it over there. That's just a workflow thing. Trust me, you're going to want to know about that. You're also going to want to know about this command down here, but we'll talk about that when we start sequencing things, because that's also a huge pain if you don't know. So, okay, we got the idea now. We use this to form our structure of our song and this to form our song. Right now, the only play command I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell you 2 of them. One is space bar. So you hit space bar. It will always start you from the top of the pattern. The other one is if you hold down shift and then hit space bar, and it's got to be the left shift key, because the other shift key controls a different method of playback. If you hold shift and hit space bar, it'll start you from where you're at. And that's a feature you're definitely going to want to know about, because that can be terribly annoying if you keep on accidentally moving around. So you get quite fast at navigating without having to touch your mouse. But for now, I'm doing it because it's a great visual way of looking at things. So, okay, we've got our pattern editor. And we've got our pattern sequencer over here, pattern editor over here. And so now you might be going, where are these sounds? Where is it getting these sounds from? You keep saying it's going to control sounds. Where are these sounds stored? And that is up here. So that brings us to this side of Renoise. And on this side, we have our... Whoops. That scared me a little bit, actually. I forgot I had that on. I have auto preview on, but we have a file browser. And I'm not going to talk about this. It's just a file browser. Like, you have some tabs here. And one thing I will say is if you have a section that you come back to a lot, like on my other tab, I constantly come back to where my samples are stored. You can right click. You see this is like white. These other ones are grayed out. That's because I have a stored location. So you right click to set the location and you left click on it to recall it. So if I go to like here and I say, I have 4 separate memory locations I can use for this tab. So each one has their own. I'd leave these ones alone. Because I go to these quite a bit. They're very handy. The other tab is more user-oriented. And if you want, I could see the song tab using their extra tabs because I don't see myself needing a crazy structure. But anyways, it's a file browser. You can dig through there, figure this stuff out more a little bit on your own. This isn't terribly complicated. So that's the browser. Moving on, if we come up here, we have our ability to load samples. So when we load a sample, it's going to come up here. And a command you're going to want to know is if you hold Alt and push up or down, it will scroll between your instruments. And you're going to want to know this because to Renoise, these tracks, they're just calling whatever's in this loaded in this slot. It doesn't care if it switches plugins suddenly. It's going to call whatever's there, and it's going to use that as the sound. So you're going to want to have... you're going to want to load your sounds into different slots. And this could get into sort of a workflow thing. But basically, if this is going to be my kick, I'm going to want to load a kick in this slot, right? So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say, okay, in this sample, I want a kick. So I'll go ahead, navigate to some kick. I'll go to the monster kick file. Yeah, we'll load up one. So you see, I double click to load it and it loads up right here. If I want to audition it, I'm going to exit edit mode. Because right now I'm in edit mode. I don't want to put a note down. I want to test my sample first. And I can test it by hitting keys on my keyboard. It's got the QWERTY, whatever. It's got the keyboard for your keyboard. So you can play your keyboard as if it was a piano. And so you get really used to it after a while. The Q, wow, that was weird. The Q on your keyboard is middle C or it is A C. So if I hit it right now, it's playing C4. And if I hit the multiplication or division signs on my number pad, which I highly recommend you have a number pad because I'm not sure how else to do it. If I hit those multiplication division, I will go up and down by octaves. And so that's really useful to know. So I'm like, okay, this is my kick. I'm going to hit escape and put down a kick. There you go. I've now put it down. And so what this is saying is play C4, which in Renoise is the playback at the sample pitch. So play it back as it was originally recorded. And it's calling the sample loaded into slot 00. You can also load plugins into these slots. We'll look at that in a sec. So if I play this, you see my tempo is very slow. Let's move it up. So there you have it. Now we're calling this kick. But if I were to let's say I want to load up a snare, but I forget that I have that up there. Let's go to monster. Let's go to wicked drum hits snares. So let's say, oh, I want that snare. So I load it up. It just overrode it. And check it out. If I play this, see, it doesn't care. It doesn't even send you a warning or anything. You have to be aware of that. You can do this. So you can hit Control Z and it undoes it. Oh my gosh. There are so many programs that don't support that kind of an undo. I don't know why. But I love that. So I'm going to move to a new instrument slot and load it. Whoops. And there we go. It's loaded. That's what this icon means. This is a sample. It's a piece of recorded audio. And now on the same track, I'm going to put down notes. And because my current selection is on the snare, it's going to call the snare. If I move it up by hitting Alt up, and I always use the left Alt. I'm not sure if there's a difference. I bet there is. But if you hit Alt up, it will move my instrument selection. And now I will be calling the kick drum instead, you see, so I don't want that. So that's what I mean by these tracks can be kind of weird. You can also pitch your sample up just by playing higher notes. So there you go. We were already making a song. And now we can hit down again, load up a new sound. Away we go. There's a lot of things that workflow-wise you should probably know about. So I've come to a point where I want to delete some notes. And let's say I have a whole bunch of other stuff going on. It can be a little confusing because not all the delete commands are equal in Renoise. Sometimes you'll delete whole patterns. Sometimes you'll delete 2 tracks. Like you can just do weird stuff. So you always hold down Shift, Delete. And that will delete the keys here. It's not Shift Backspace. I forgot what Backspace does. But it's not Shift Backspace. It's the Shift and the Delete key specifically. So, okay, cool. We've got our thing. And you notice I'm making selections by just simply clicking and dragging. And there's ways when you're sequencing that you'll work with the keyboard in a much more intuitive manner. But sometimes you just can't beat the flexibility of the mouse. So we can load sounds up here. So we've covered loading sounds, putting sounds down, the way to tell this thing to play back the way we want, at least at a very elementary level, and also the pattern sequencer. Something I'm not sure if I said yet is if you scroll here, you'll scroll up and down by patterns. If you scroll here, you'll scroll up and down in the sequencer. So that could be a fast way of navigating. And of course, you can hit Control up, down while your keyboard focuses on the pattern editor, and you'll move between patterns. Pretty sure I said that, but it's a good review. Okay, so up here, this is self-explanatory. You see the audio waveform of your stuff. So you see your kick. It's very pleasing. But this also serves a useful purpose. It's a display that's useful in more ways than just looking good. If you right click, you'll be able to solo things. And you can do that also by simply clicking on the tracks themselves and soloing them. And if you right click, you'll solo a track. And you can left click to add more tracks to your solo so that they'll all play at the same time. But I prefer to do it up here. And you notice if I name it, it even changes the name. So this is the buttons are bigger. They're like way bigger. So I think it's a little easier to do. There's keyboard commands for this too, but we're not going to sweat those. So that's pretty handy. You can also left click to turn them off and on. It's like a toggle. That's what this is. You may see another display. You get to it by hitting this button right here. And I have mine on a spectrogram, but if you right click, you can change to scopes, or you can change to spectrum, and they have all these configurations to make it look really cool. And there's like a lot of options that you don't often get with these sorts of displays. So it's kind of cool they include them. And this is it shows your stereo width. That's what that does. A vector scope, I believe, is what it's called. So, okay, cool. That's our displays. So now you know where these things are. Now you may have seen another window that I often have open. It's this window. And this is more of a workflow thing. This allows me to get to controls that are very convenient. Let's say I want to duplicate my kick pattern and have my snare play the exact same thing. I could copy my notes, but if I copy my notes, like this is the snare, right? Or nothing. There's nothing on O2. So right now it calls nothing. So I'm going to hit Shift Home. That'll select those. I'm going to hit Control C to copy, and I'm going to hit Tab to move across to the next column. So that's what Tab does. Shift Tab will move you backwards. So Tab goes one way, Shift Tab goes the other way. I'm going to hit Control V. And now let's say, okay, this is my track, but this track is dedicated to my my snare drum, right? And let's say, oh, but these are an octave too low. Well, right now I have it as my selection in my pattern. So I have it right here. I can transpose it up or down an octave. So you see, it just went to 5. Now it's at 4. And that's really useful. And if we come down here past our transposition options, we can also do this ability to switch instruments with other instruments. So right now it's calling instrument 2. So I say, okay, instrument 2 is what it's calling. I want it to call instrument 1 because 1 is my snare. And now I can hit remap, delete, or swap. I'm just going to hit swap, and bang, it now swaps them. And now it's calling the correct instrument. So very useful tab. I honestly don't have the delay. I don't have this one open very often. But this other stuff, I'm usually touching. And this just controls on what level these adjustments take place. So if you're going to select over here, you're going to want a different setting over here. So cool. We've got those windows down. I don't know a fancy name for this window. I'll just call it the magic selection bar window thing for now. And okay, we got our scopes. Got it. Good. Let's dive down here. You're probably looking at this. You say, oh, this is very similar to Ableton. And what it is you can type in effects, or you can browse your effects here. I prefer to type because it's a million times faster. And you can also favorite things. I haven't done any favoriting yet. But let's say I want to filter. I'll just type in filter and double click. It loads up a filter and I'm able to control my filter. Now, this is a little bit more advanced. We'll talk about this much later on. But if I want to automate something, I can click on a little box, or I can click down here on this automation tab, and it will bring me to this window that allows me to do automating. I'm not going to cover that here. That is a main component. It's just not necessary for a while. It's overwhelming to new people. So that's where that is if you want to mess with it. The quick way to get to it, if you want to automate something specifically, is you hit the little box next to a setting, and bang, it automates it for you. You can see it's represented here. And if you put down automation lines, it will show you there's automation there. And you can also delete all envelopes and song. You delete some. You have controls. I'll let you mess with it. But anyways, that's how you load up effects. And you'll see these just come up naturally as we try to make music. Or let's try as we make some music. So, okay, cool. We have these things down. There's always more. Like, there's so many buttons here. I could talk forever, seemingly. Okay, so I also want to say one more thing about the pattern editor. Sometimes when you're working, I'm going to hit Shift Delete to delete these specific notes. Sometimes when you're working, you will find that your pattern begins to loop and it becomes very annoying. And it might be because this is on. You can drag and click. This will set it so that it will loop through these patterns. But you might find that it continues to loop on one pattern. And that would be because of this guy up here. It's the loop option. And so to turn that off, you hit Control and then scroll lock on your keyboard. If you don't have a scroll lock command, I believe you're just going to have to hit this. If you want to remap a command, I do this all the time. If you hit Control Comm, it'll bring up your preferences. And I didn't really cover setting this up. I'm assuming you've got that all under wraps, especially if you're this far into the video. You can come in here and you can search for keyboard commands, and you can also reassign them, and it will also tell you if it's already got an assignment somewhere. So this is just genius. And there are people on the Renoise forums who have specifically scripted better keyboard shortcuts. Like, for example, they didn't have one for a duplicate just one time command, and so someone scripted one, and I totally use it all the time. Well, not all the time, but enough to where I went looking for one because I was like, I need this as a command. And so if you feel that way, chances are it probably exists somewhere on the forums. Now let's jump into the background a little bit. So the next major window is our mixing window. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but this is your mixer, and adjusting the volume here is the same. So if you're in your edit window and you're making adjustments here, changing the volume here is the same as changing the volume on the mixer. This is essentially your mixing strip. And so all the effects that you have, you see our filter shows up here. And so if we click, we'll be able to edit these. Now, these commands, this is where it gets a little weird. It took me a while to get used to this. These commands, whatever instrument is going through is being called by this track. So track 1 is our kick, right? But if, let's say we put our snare here, it will go through all the processing on this kick. But if you call that same snare on channel 01 on the second track, it will go through its own separate processing. And so it'll be cloned and will receive different processing. So it can be a little confusing at first. And so when you use sends here, you might be asking yourself, do I even want to use sends? This is a more complicated, more advanced topic, but you still want to use sends. I try to keep my stuff separate. I do not usually do anything like that. I normally don't have a very good reason for doing it. So I try to dedicate my tracks to a specific purpose. Like this is the kick, this is the snare. But let's talk about the way, if you're new, that you should probably start thinking about it. So if you have something like your kick drum that you want to affect separately, because this track is for your kick, but you don't want to throw a whole load of processing on here, because what if you decide that your kick would be more convenient on track 7 later? So what you're going to do is you go into your sampler. So you click the sampler icon here, and you have some options, but one of them is amongst all these menus, you can go into your effects and create effects that will only affect that sample specifically at the root, so that no matter what track you call it in, it will always sound the same. And so this can be creatively constricting, but also it can be way more organized. It just depends on what the purpose of your project is. But I'm not going to cover all the details in here, but that's something I definitely want to point out. If if you already know about mixing and stuff, then this is an important feature to note. So you're probably going to want to create effect chains back here. So you create a chain. It brings up basically a little mixing strip, only it's specific to your kick. So we're going to talk about the sampler separately just because it's so fully featured. But when you load up a sound, it's going to load it up here in your sampler. And you're going to be able to affect and manipulate your sounds from this menu. You can add envelopes and modulation, LFOs, those sorts of natures. So if you want to change the way the volume, like if your kick's like boom, and you want it to be boom, 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 you can fix some of it by editing it in the waveform view and then adding a envelope. So we'll look at this more in detail because this is like completely overwhelming if you're new. But when you want to change the behavior of your sound, this is where you go. And if you already are familiar with the sampling engine of some kind, like Contact or something, and you've actually made a couple libraries, you'll be right at home here. It's not difficult to figure out. They also have an option to create phrases. So instead of writing it all out in this pattern sequencer mode, you can go to your sampler and you can write out a phrase and then hit one key. It's basically like an arpeggiator, sort of. Not really, but sort of. It's like way crazier. It's like a sequencer inside a sequencer. Another thing is people are all the time making tools. They're called doofers, I believe, inside of Renoise. And you can come in, if I go to my edit window, we can look up bundle content doofers. And they're like extended. They have a special programming language. You can actually program. If the program doesn't do something you want it to do, and you really want it, you can figure out how to program it. You can make a program that will literally extend the features. And you can get tons of these on the Renoise forums. People actively make them. So just a lot of buttons, a lot of commands, but you have your key zones, your waveform. This is probably the window you're going to touch the most. And then modulation, second most touched window for instruments, and then your effects. Now you might be going, where's the plugins? So if we come over here to a plugin window, it gets a little crazier. You can have 3 sources triggered from any one sample. We're not going to look at that. We're going to keep things separate because I don't usually have a good reason to do that. So you can come to the plugin tab and you can scroll through your plugins. Like I could load up Harmor, and there it is. There's Harmor, and I can play a Harmor now from track 2, which I believe we already have commands for track 2. And Harmor is very loud by default, so I'll turn it down. So you see, I turn it down a lot too. It's still freaking loud. So there you have that. So we can load up our plugins here. Also, if you're like, how do I load up my plugins? Put all your plugins into a folder. You can have 2 folders called by Renoise, and you go into your plugins miscellaneous. Oh, you might be going, how do I bring up that preferences? Control comma. This is what I bring up a lot because I'm constantly looking up shortcuts. I'm still memorizing them. You come in here and you see you can put 2 file paths to point it to where your extra plugins are. So that's how you do that. I keep my native instruments stuff separate. So that's really kind of a handy tool to have. Okay, cool. So once we have that, we also have this MIDI page. I like never come in here, like sometimes for fun, but I don't do a lot of outboard gear stuff currently with Renoise, so I don't have to worry about this very often, but you'd come in here for that. And that's the main components of Renoise. I know it's a ton of information. You may consider watching it again, but that's it. If you have any questions about this, let me know. We are going to go much more into depth on each component. Believe it or not, that was being pretty brief, especially over the sampler tab. But there are so many little things you kind of have to know to get a workflow to really work that it's just difficult to cover it all in one video without it becoming extraordinarily long. So if you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.
Has an influence on this question. I believe that Gandhi's views were the most enlightened of all the political